It looks like you've been an educator since 1984, correct?
Oh, yeah, I think that's
I
right.
think I'm curious what comes to mind for you for what's changed between now and 1984. If you, I know there's a lot, but if you could
Mm.
narrow it down, what are the biggest things that you've noticed that have changed between your time starting as an educator and now your role in creating formulas and environments for the broader spectrum of care?
Well, I think the biggest difference that comes to mind is that when I first started teaching, we could sing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" to the children, or "Humpty Dumpty Sat on the Wall," and they would be so into it, and they'd be so engaged, and it's like celebrity status. You just play these little finger rhymes and say the nursery rhymes, and the children were really in awe. Now there's so much competition to entertain the children, and that's what I see. The biggest difference is that because of screens, because of TV, animation, and also because of, I think society has changed a little too. Parenting has changed. And I think now children are assuming that they're going to be entertained and they have a shorter sort of attention span, and those simple little things aren't offered as much to children. I don't think children's brains have changed all that much because they still enjoy those repetition and repetitive phrases and games and things like that. That's really important with the brain development for executive functioning skills and the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So we're going into the brain now. This notion of repeat, repeat, elaborate is really important. So you repeat things over and over and over, and that deepens the neural pathways in the brain. It's sort of a bit like muscle memory. And once you do that, then the caring adult, whether it be the teacher or the parent, add something a little bit of a challenge, add something a bit different, and then the child has to adapt the knowledge that they have to this new challenge now, this new concept. And that's part of executive functioning skills, and that's what we do in a lot of quality centres. We allow children time to be a child so they could have a childhood, and we give them time and give them lots of open-ended materials and resources and things that they can use at their own pace, their own level. Not so much screens. We want to try and get away from those. There's a place for them, and if they're a valuable tool to be used in the teaching process, there's definitely a place for screens. But for the most part, we want to develop those interactions and the communication and relationships between the children and the adults. And so by giving children these opportunities to explore, it's really a valuable thing. And that's how we set our children up for success. It's not drilling them on knowing the alphabet and knowing how to count. That will come. They will be able to sound out words and read in their own time if we give them the good foundation and the good basis. And I think sadly now the focus is on pushing children before they're ready, developmentally ready to be able to count, be able to read, be able to write, even to hold a pencil. There's a big push to write your name as fast as you can. Why? Let's just play in the sand for a little while, and how about we just play with the Play-Doh and strengthen those muscles in your fingers and your hands before we try and put a pencil into it. So I think there's a big push. Time seems to be shortened. There's pressure on teachers, there's pressure on families, there's pressure on children. And I think we need to stop all that. And let's just go back to letting children be children, and they will develop in their own rate at their own time. And the work I do around the brain proves that. The centres that I've set up using my brain set pedagogy, my process, the teachers and the parents say that there's just an amazing change in the children. Behaviours decrease, if they've had behaviour challenges, that decreases. The children become more confident, they're more resilient, they're more independent because they're given time and they're given quality materials and resources like at Savanna here that are just beautiful. They're given the time and quality materials so that they can explore and, extend their skills and have a chance to repeat, elaborate, and just have a childhood instead of being pushed. We get enough of that when we're an adult. I just think let children be children.
That's so cool. And it's such an interesting dichotomy between the significant increase in stimulus, but also the need for repetition. And I think part of that is there's this dynamic with social media and with the comparison game of my kids at this developmental stage and your kids at that developmental stage, and we're pushing for the holding a pencil and all the examples you just gave. But the reality is, it almost feels like it's a skill to be bored, to be okay being bored, and to have the ability to entertain yourself without the need of a screen or without the need of your parent to solve all your problems. And so maybe talk a little bit about what role boredom plays in these, early formative years.
Oh, I love that you've asked that question. I often talk to parents and say, if your child comes to you and says, I'm bored, that's like music to your ears. That's the best thing they can say to you, because then the opportunity is there for them to use their imagination and be creative and go find something to do. I think as parents and adults generally, we tend to think we need to entertain and we need to find the solutions and we need to think for the children because they couldn't possibly do it for themselves. So I think if we give them a chance and let them use their imagination and be creative, we'll see amazing development with the children. So being bored is fantastic. And my advice is always, if your child comes to you and says, I'm bored, the answer to that is, okay, what can you do now? What could you go outside and do? What could you do inside? Ask some questions about what can they do, but don't find the solution. Don't give them the answer, because that's what we tend to do as adults. We think we need to give the answer, but we already know the answer, but the child doesn't. So let's give them a chance to try and explore and find their own answer. That's how we build problem solvers. That's how we build decision makers. That's how we build children who feel confident and independent, by letting them do it themselves. It's the same as when we go places and we, as the adult, carries the child's bag. Why can't they carry their own bag? Let them be independent. Let them unpack their own bag. Yeah, it takes a little longer, but it's giving them the skills for life. And that's what we want to do in these early years, not find all the solutions for them. We actually want them to have a childhood that's exciting and interesting, and they've explored lots of things. The neural pathways are developed and deepened. They end up with lots of new synaptic connections that eventually are pruned off when they find the right way to do things and the fastest and most efficient way to do things. All these other ways that they've tried all drop off in the brain. There's not a problem. We just need to give them opportunities and time to do it, instead of trying to push and pressurise children, and hurry. Get in the car, get your shoes on, get to school. Yes, there's time frames, of course, but if you have a routine and a system set up at home to make sure that all of that falls into place, it's all good. So if your child is bored, music to your ears, best thing ever.
People severely underestimate the reinforcement and the enabling of kids teaching parents what they want, as opposed to parents teaching kids what they really need and to be safe. And so I'm curious, you've done work in Bolivia, you've done work in the UK and the US, all over the US really, and you're from Australia. Is there a cultural difference in that with boredom and with stimulus? Do you see differences between US culture versus UK, Australia, or is this like a world dynamic that, as the information age has, demanded an increase in stimulus, that's across the board, or are there any differences culturally between those regions?
I think it's across the board. I think as parents, we think we're doing the best for our children, so we're trying to supply the answers for the children. So, the expectations on 3-year-olds is really something that you should be expecting from maybe a 6 or 7-year-old, but it's being pushed down because they're looking for greater outcomes in literacy and numeracy and different subject areas when the children are older. And they think that if we start this information, assertion early, it's going to make a difference. All that does is children might comply and they might do it and they might appear to be getting the idea, but the concepts aren't deep. The understanding isn't deep. They might have the knowledge, but do they have the understanding? Probably not. And they might achieve until they reach about grade 4, and then the research shows that about grade 4 they drop right off because it's been push, and they've achieved, but by about grade 4 they sort of drop off a little bit and their results slide back. And I think it's because they haven't got that foundation that young children should have in the early childhood years, where they can explore things, the things that we've just been talking about. The social and emotional development is way more important than academics, because if you're confident and you're resilient and you're independent and you feel good about yourself, you're prepared to take a risk in your learning. So then you're prepared to go and ask the teacher when you're in grade 1, how do you do this, or what do you do? Because you're feeling confident in yourself and you're independent. If you've been pushed early and your academics might be up, but your social and emotional skills haven't really been developed or supported, then you're too scared to go and ask anybody anything, because you don't, to start with, you don't know how. You don't know how to go and phrase that question, because communication hasn't been a big focus in the early years. It's more about outcomes. But if we can give children those communication skills and that strength and opportunities to take a risk in their learning, and understand that if they make a mistake, that's okay, just have another go. And good teachers model that, good parents model that, and we have something called a talk aloud. And so we say, oh, I messed that up. Oh, I'm just going to have another turn. I'm just going to try that again. Oh, I wrote that wrong. I'm going to write that again and see if I can try again. And you do the talk alouds so that children understand that it's okay to make a mistake. You just have another go. And they're the things that we teach in these early childhood years. So if we push down too much, a lot of that goes out the window, because there's no time for that, because there's these outcomes to achieve. So we just need to, I go back to the childhood. We need to let children just develop and have the opportunity and have time. They've been developing since children were ever around. So, why do we think we've got to change it all now and make them achieve things when they're 3 and 4? We don't.
It's almost like we're encouraging our kids to experience burnout at the age of 7, as opposed to normal adults that experience that at 30 or 40, whenever their brains are fully developed and they have hopefully a support system to handle that. But I can't imagine what that means to a child to not feel comfortable to express themselves. And I think I've experienced that with my son here. Initially, he'd have a great day and he would experience everything that Savanna has to offer. But then coming home, it would be this just meltdown and this emotional release and this almost like you're back to your safe space so you can be a kid again, as opposed to being a child in a daycare center. Is that similar to what these kids that don't have this experience and this environment go through in grade school whenever they don't have that safety? Is that what you're talking about with, whenever you're suppressed as a kid and you don't feel comfortable, then you're not comfortable asking those questions of, how do I do this? Can you help me? And you kind of just end up being in the corner and being disengaged, as opposed to feeling comfortable and feeling supported. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It is, but children are individuals as well. Some children handle it and they're okay, and they go through, and they're already confident children when they might come to an outside home care environment, whatever that looks like. So some children are just able to deal with that, but some children can't. And so some children do suffer with this anxiety, and they don't know how to express themselves. They don't know how to ask questions. So they do tend to be maybe quieter in the classroom. And when they come home, exactly as you said, when they come home, they relax and they release, and they're like crazy people. And the parent might say to the teacher, we're having all of these behaviour issues at home with my child, and the teacher's saying, oh, we don't see any of that here. And it's because the child is complying at school or a centre or wherever they are. And as you said, they go home to their safe place and they let loose. So if we can balance that a little more, so that children are feeling comfortable in their schooling environment or in their day environment, when they go home, it's not such a big transition. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. From the way we set up the environment, and you mentioned before that's what I do, and we relate that to what's going on in the brain, what the brain needs, but also holistic development. How are the fine motor skills, gross motor skills, language skills, your social and emotional that we talked about, but then your brain, what's going on in the brain? So how do we talk to children so they even understand what we're saying? How do we give them instructions so that they're going to be successful and achieve? How do we set up the environment so that it doesn't trigger any trauma experiences that they may have had? because that's something we haven't really touched on either with the whole children who've experienced trauma. So we need to consider that too, because most of us have experienced some sort of trauma, whether it's just going to hospital or whether it's going through COVID. We all did that. Or whether it's some other bigger event that's happened. All of us have experienced some sort of trauma. And that is triggered in the brain by various things. So how do we set up our environment so that we don't trigger the brain? How do we set up the spaces that we create in our environment so that children have opportunities to try things out? And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, they just try again so that they're successful. How do we select the materials that we put in each of the spaces so that children of any ability level, whether they be gifted, whether they be mainstream, or whether they have a challenge, they can be successful? So how do we select those materials? How do we position them? Where do we put them in the room? There's a whole lot to it to build these skills of independence and confidence and self-esteem and that willing to take a risk, so that when they get into the school environment, which may be a little more structured, they have those skills to be able to succeed and try again, ask for help. So that's what we're aiming to do in these early childhood years, to give them a really good foundation for the rest of their lives. It's important. I come back again to preserving childhood.
Yeah, that foundation word is so underrepresented when it comes to early childhood. And I'm curious what your thoughts are now, having been here at Savanna. How does this environment compare to others that you've experienced and others that you've consulted with?
It's a good question. And as you enter Savanna, it's just a calming experience. And there is lots of calming neutral tones in the wall colour, the furnishings. It's all timber. The timber is beautiful, and that's calming. That's bringing a bit of Reggio Emilia into the centres, so bringing the outside in, because it's all timber. And the selection of materials that the children are using has been really thoughtfully done. So that's really adding to that safety of the brain. So my approach is brain set, and the S, the E and the T stands for the survival part of the brain stem, the emotional part of the brain, which is the amygdala that sits sort of halfway up your head, sort of near your ear, and then the thinking part of the brain, the neocortex at the top. And so what I notice in Savanna, as you walk in, we've got the survival part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain. They're sort of taken care of because there's lots of curves in the spaces as well, whether it be the furniture or whether it's the backs of the chairs or whether it's the curved walls on entry to the whole centre. So that sort of calms the brain. And it's part of my design elements that I've created. There's 16 design elements that should be overlapping in each room. And I see a lot of them in the Savanna rooms, and it's just very calming, and so that soothes the brain. Once the survival part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain are aligned, then the thinking can shine. It's easy. So my mantra is, a calm brain is a thinking brain. So if we calm everything down, then we think clearly, and children can create amazing things. I've seen children do things in a calm environment where the environment has been carefully curated, like it is in Savanna. The things that children create, it's you wouldn't plan it. If you're a teacher, there's no way you could plan it. And it's, usually ahead of the curriculum, because we let the children be children, and, the sky's the limit, really. But you've got to give them the right environment to allow that to happen. Yeah, there's a lot of steps in creating a space that children are going to shine in, and Savanna has achieved a lot of those. So yeah, it's a lovely centre. I've really enjoyed walking through this morning and talking to the children, talking to the staff, but also talking to parents and hearing what the parents' view is on Savanna. And it's all really positive. Everybody is calm here. Everybody feels safe, feels satisfied, and I think it's a really nice environment for us to set up those foundations for life. That is, I guess, is the intention here.
I love the way you said, as a teacher, there's no way you can plan for those things. Whenever a child does feel calm and they're able to express themselves, it's amazing what can happen. That's been something that we've talked a lot about here with teachers and with, I would say, traditionally trained teachers with an education background, with a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. You almost have to unlearn the things that traditional education teaches you with a teacher-led environment as opposed to a child-led environment. Maybe talk a little bit about why that is, and why is it so hard to find people who have a background in education, but it's almost like you have to unlearn so many things before you can fit into an environment like this. Why is that?
I think it comes back to the pressure that teachers feel, and maybe traditional ways that they've been taught as well. There's a lot of pressure on centres to follow regulations and to be accredited and to stay accredited and follow the rules and all of that. So there's a lot of pressure on the hierarchy of a centre, and that filters down to the teachers in the centre, or the educators in the centre. That, of course, filters down to the children. So now there's pressure all around. And so people don't feel as though they can be creative, and they, just let the children try and do things and facilitate. I think the terminology may need to change a little, because the word teacher means that you're teaching somebody, you're the one with all the knowledge. But if you're a facilitator, that means you're helping with the learning, or a co-researcher. The language, I think, changes the interpretation and the focus on the connection and the interaction between the teacher, I've just used it, teacher and the child. And as a facilitator, you can ask lots of questions of children, and because you're really just asking them information to help you help them. And if we're using open-ended questions as a facilitator, so, tell me what would happen if we took the wheel off that car. What would happen? Tell me what would happen if, we added 2 more wheels. Could it go faster? What could we do? Let's try it. Using those open-ended approaches to children allows the children to think, which is what we said before, make their own decisions and problem solve, all of those things.
What advice would you give somebody who maybe was exposed to a Reggio Emilia environment and has a traditional background and wants to get out of that traditional education system and into more of a child-led environment? What advice would you give to them?
I think it depends on where they work, because sometimes that's not possible, depending on the workplace.
Well, let's use Savannah as an example. If you
Okay.
have people in the North Texas area specifically that love being around kids, have that, zeal for teaching, maybe we can use that word, but recognize that that might not be the best way. In some instances it may, but I think the reality is, and most in this environment for Savannah specifically, is it's not. And it's interesting to me that it's so hard to find people that think that way, but I know that there are plenty of people who may want to think that way, but like you said, I think I had never thought about the pressure of performing as a teacher. And maybe for those people that have maybe a traditional education who want to be at Savannah specifically, what advice would you give them?
I would suggest that if they're wanting to come and work at a place like Savannah, that they already have that open mindset, that they're already thinking about other options. They're already thinking that where they are at the moment doesn't quite feel right, even though they love what they do, and in their own room they might incorporate some of the Reggio Emilia approaches, or Montessori, or Steiner, or heck, maybe even brain set. But, they might incorporate some of those things, but perhaps they can't totally embrace it because of the environment that they're in. So I would suggest that people who come to work at Savannah already have a bit more of an open mindset, and that they are already thinking, well, I think we could do better for the children. We can work differently with the children. And that's why they would look for an alternate place to work rather than a traditional centre. Now, traditional centres have got some very good people in them and very good administrators, and so we appreciate the work that they do. But there are other ways to do it as well. Everyone who works with children, I think, do it from their heart, and they do it with the best intentions, and they do what they can with the information they have and the situation that they're in. So, I think we're all trying to do the best we can. But sometimes, you look around and you think, this just isn't for me anymore. And maybe you've grown, and maybe you've evolved a little more. Maybe you've done some reading, or you've seen some podcasts like this one, or you've just informed yourself a little bit more. and now you're starting to think about things differently. I think it comes from the teacher that's in the traditional spaces that, have worked, but there are other ways.
Let's take that one step further and maybe think about what does a healthy relationship between a teacher and a parent look like to you, especially here at Savannah with parents being literally in the next room and having the opportunity to still nurse and still to engage in their children's education as a parent. What does a healthy relationship between parent and educator look like?
It comes back to that mindset too. Many parents see teachers as being an authority figure. They drop their child off to the teacher, and the teacher knows best on how to teach their child. That's not really the case. It's a partnership between parent and teacher. But some parents believe that. I was a teacher for 25 years in Australia, and I had a parent say that to me directly, say, well, you're the teacher. I don't know. I don't know what to do with my child. You're the teacher, which I didn't feel was accurate. She was actually the first teacher. I'm learning from her and trying to work with her child so together we can support the child. Because some parents feel the teacher is the teacher, and some teachers think, well, I'm the teacher. So, you're the parent, drop off at the door, goodbye. Some people are like that. But here in Savannah, it's a change. It's a different approach. And parents are partners with the teachers to work with the children. It's a joint thing. And I think if we can relax that territorial sort of approach and think, no, look, we're doing it together. We just want the best for the children. And really, if we have the best for the children, we're actually supporting our future society. The children that are in our care now, they're the ones that are going to be making decisions, government decisions, when we're in the old people's home. So we want, we want good decisions. So we want to have children who feel supported and loved and have these really great foundations. It's in our own best interests to do that. But I think that whole partnership between parents and teachers needs a bit of a rethink in some ways. And I see that here in Savannah where there's an extended drop-off time. One of the mothers was just telling me just a minute ago that she loves the extended drop-off time because she can sit with her child over about 30 minutes, and there's a window in the morning that the children are able to be dropped off. And I just can't quite remember the hours that Jessica said, but she was saying it's an extended period of drop-off. So you don't all have to be here at 9 o'clock or 7 o'clock. It's an overtime. So that too is a nice, easy transition. So there's less stress in the mornings with parents having to make it on time. And if they've got to go to work, that's of course their own pressure. But this partnership between parents and teachers, I think, is really important, and one that needs to be promoted more. Now, there's a flip side to that because that doesn't always work because I've been in that situation where you invite parents openly into your space, and some parents don't go, or some parents don't like the way the interaction is occurring between their child and other children, and they start to show their concern that way. So sometimes that can be disruptive with the whole program because now you've got a little bit of angst between the teacher and the parent and protectiveness about the child. So it doesn't always work. So communication is really important, and that ability to get to know the parent and the family and the teacher so that they're on different terms. It's not parent-teacher, it's partners working together. And here, having the parents able to come in and nurse, and they've got a nice little space that you can nurse your baby, and then the baby goes back to the facilitators in the room. That's a really nice addition. And having the co-working space so the parents can be working, so that they're not missing work, but they're close to their children. And when they've finished work for the day, when they've had enough, they can come and spend some time with their child or take their child home with them. So it's just a nice, relaxed approach, I think, and it really supports that notion that parents and teachers are partners in the growth and development of children, and that's what we want. We want this nice, easy partnership. It comes down to communication, though, and it comes down to education. What are we doing here, and why are we doing this? So that there isn't any head-butting I guess, between parent and teacher, because that's not the purpose. And I think discussions around that are important in the first place.
It's almost like a calm brain is a thinking brain, works for parents as well.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
think, we all in society understand that when you take care of yourself, your children are more taken care of, and as opposed to vice versa. But there's so much anxiety around first-time parents and around this first couple years of life, that there's so much uncertainty that not many parents have a background in brain science like you do. And I think that probably perpetuates that relationship of you're the teacher, you know best. What advice would you give to parents who aren't as educated as you in brain science and don't really understand the significance of the early years, but they want to, and they want to have that guidance, and they want to have people tell them what they should do? What would you tell them?
I think I would say you don't have to know everything as a parent. You don't have to know about brain science. You just have to love your child, and you just have to relax and just love your child, and have your child somewhere during the day that the child's happy and they love your child too, and you feel comfortable, and you feel as a parent, you feel safe, you feel comfortable, you feel loved, you feel as though you belong in the centre as well, because then your child will too. Your child picks up on you. I don't think parents need to know everything. Teachers, we don't know everything either. We're just doing the best we can with the information we have, the same as the parents do with the information they've got. But together, we're strong, and we can do the best we can for the children. But I think parents, just love your children and give them a childhood, give them the opportunity to have a childhood. And that's what I see here in Savanna. There's a childhood happening here, which is really rich and wonderful.
I've always loved, I heard one time, the mark of a good parent is thinking that it's hard. If you think parenting is easy, you're probably not doing it right. And if you think parenting is hard, regardless of what age or stage you're at, it's because you care, and it's because you want to put effort into it, and maybe seem like an insurmountable odd for you to do it right. But at the same time, as long as you care, and as long as you have that ability to create a connection with somebody, whether it be your children or even the teacher that's watching over your children.
I think that the intention of a lot of centres is to build a community.
I think one of the things that people get intimidated by is that brain science. You're talking about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and your
All the big
frontal
words.
lobe. All the things that people are like, I can hear that and I've heard it before, but I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
If you could boil your formula down to something that is distillable and can be easily understood by a parent who doesn't necessarily care to learn more about the brain, but cares about their child, what would you say to them?
Okay, so I do work with parents, and I work with teachers all over the world to share this information about brain set. And I also work with universities and professors, and so of all levels.
Yeah.
And what people say to me is that I've made a really complex topic easy, simple to understand. And I guess that probably stems from my 25 years talking to 5-year-olds. So I think I can distill it down so that we could all understand it. But, we've all heard those words, as you've just said, the prefrontal cortex and the neural pathways and blah, 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 all of that stuff. Basically, what it comes down to is the S, the E, and the T of the brain that I sort of explained before about the survival and the emotional part of the brain and the thinking part of the brain. As parents or teachers, if we can just make sure that our environment accommodates all of those levels, we're good to go. So at home, for parents, you might do things like have a little space that you create at the end of the couch, between the couch and the wall, and just put a little blanket down there and a little pillow and a fluffy toy or a book or something. So it's a little hideaway space for children, so they can get into these little defined spaces. And that's what I talk about a lot in BrainSet. It's one of the elements of BrainSet, having defined spaces. When we do that, we can support children to be more focused in whatever they're doing. It's a non-threatening space. Children can just be focused. If there's another child with them, they can communicate or not if they want to. It's up to them, but they're not expected to. there's behaviour issues decrease because they're doing something that they're interested in, and that's the other thing. What we put into those spaces needs to relate to the children's developmental level, what they're capable of doing, but also what they're interested in. So it would be a waste of time if you put me in a corner with dinosaurs or something. I think, oh yeah, that's so not interesting. But if you put something else in there that I really am interested in, like gardening or something, then I'd probably stay there for a while. So it's about checking in with the children and knowing what they like. And if you're the parent, you know what they like. And so you add things into the environment for the children so that they can get away into these little cubby places, and they don't have to be with you all the time. They don't even have to be with their other brothers and sisters if they don't want to. Then you have other spaces where that is the place where, so the living room might be the space where the family gathers, but there might be another little area where just, the child and their brother or sister can play. The other thing to remember is that we as humans are born natural explorers. So we want to explore the environment. We want to pick up things and touch it and play with it and see what it feels like. And that's how we're designed. And we're also designed for interaction. So people are built to connect and communicate and have relationships with people. So as parents or teachers, it's really important that we build those relationships. And if we have these small little defined spaces that children are in, then it's easy as the adult to go and sit with them in this little space and just talk to them about whatever they're focused on at the moment, and just have this nice little conversation. That's the way we build relationships. Another thing that some of the research says is that if you just spend 1 minute a day with a child and ask them about something not related to their learning, just like, how are your new shoes going? They still squeaking when you walk? Or, or how's that new puppy? Still tearing up all your shoes? Or, those sorts of things. That's not related to anything to do with learning. That shows the child that you're actually interested in them, not what they do. It's actually that you're interested in how they feel about things rather than the outcome or the output, either in a centre or at home. So building those relationships is really important. And then saying, oh, thank you for telling me all that. That's really nice to know. So they know, oh, this has actually been special. This is just you and I. So, building those relationships is important, having those little defined spaces, and that all relates to that safety and emotional part of the brain. And then once that's aligned, then we can start to think. So there's a whole lot more to it that, I usually cover with teachers over a couple of days. But in a nutshell, if we can just make sure, or one part of it is we can just have little spaces for children so that you can spend time and build relationships, that's a good start.
When you say defined spaces, for example, at home for parents, one of the things that you talk about is these free-flowing environments to be able to go freely between them. I think whenever I hear defined space, I think of parents that put their kids in this 10 by 10 cube and they're just like, oh, that's your safe space. You can be crazy and play, and you have things that you're interested in, but it's not a free-flowing space. It's confined, even though it is still defined, I guess. Is that an important thing to do at home, to have an extension of that environment as the third teacher, to have the ability to go freely between the defined spaces and the communal spaces, or what is the significance of that?
That's a good point. And the word defined, I can understand how you would think that. That's a good point. The defined spaces, when I talk about defined spaces, I just mean that you put some sort of indicator that this is your area, this is your space. So it could just be a mat on the floor. Or as I said, it could be that little corner between the wall and the end of the couch. It could be that space. And yeah, they can just move around freely. What I talk about when I train teachers in centres is that if a child was at home all day, and normally children are in a centre most of the day, but if they were at home all day, they'd probably have 8, we're going to say defined spaces, meaning 8 rooms that they would generally go backwards and forwards. They could roam the house, right? One of my elements in BrainSet is called wayfinding. Wayfinding is literally finding the way. And this is really important for children who have experienced trauma. They need to be able to come into the room and be able to see the way. What I see in a lot of spaces is that upon entry to a room, a classroom, the teachers have put a shelf there on entry, and that might be to hang up for their bags or something. But as a child walks in, they can't see where else to go. If you get down on your knees at home and also in a classroom and be child size, child height, and have a look around and see what the child sees, sometimes we are quite amazed that what we think is a good setup is just not for children. And if they can't really see where to go, it's this, split second panic, like, oh, I don't know where to go. It's like being dropped into a shopping centre or a shopping mall and being told to go find the coffee shop. You've got 10 minutes because there's a really important meeting, and 10 minutes, go find the coffee shop, and you've never been there before. Well, there's a minute of panic. Like, I don't know where to go. How do I find the coffee shop? Then you see a sign and you go, oh, thank goodness. You go to the sign and then you see another sign points you in another direction. And then finally you see the coffee shop. Wayfinding in a classroom is the same. You need to have these almost signposts so that children can bounce from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and they feel safe in doing so. So remember the S, the E and the T. So they're feeling safe in that survival part of the brain. It's that sense of safety. Then they feel safe, and then they can think clearly.
I think the last question I have for you is what would you say to a parent who feels like there's more to this childhood education thing than what they're currently getting, and hasn't really been exposed to a place like Savanna or Reggio Emilia or Montessori environment, but they want more for their child's education. They want more for that connection and those relationships, everything we've talked about. What would you tell them?
Take your child and go and do some tours of different centres and see how you feel in the centre. Not so much have a look around. I know if you come to Savanna, you're going to go, wow. But, it's, that might not be a possibility for you. There might be a wait list, or, it might be too far from where you live, or whatever the situation might be. So my advice to parents is to take your child with you and go to different centres, see how you feel in the centre. Also see if the person who's giving you the tour shows you the whole centre, or if they just take you to the room where your child would be. Because what you want to see is the whole centre, because you want to see where your child will be going in the subsequent years. And you also want to see how the adults are interacting with the children, and see if anyone talks to your child as well. And, you'll get that sense of welcome, homeliness, friendliness. Look for places that are familiar to home, don't have too many plastic things in them, that have the couch, that have the soft furnishings, so it's familiar to the children. And that goes to the E, the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain. When children see it's familiar to home, it helps them to relax and be calm. Calm brain's a thinking brain. So, look for those home-like spaces, but also how you feel in that space is that's the big thing. How do you feel?
Is there anything else that you'd like to plug for BrainSet, or where can people find more information about you?
I'd like to invite any directors or centre personnel or parents, if you're wanting to know more about BrainSet and the work that I can do to help you with your children, either set up your environments or help with team building or behaviour concerns, any of those things, because it all feeds into BrainSet. You can contact me at futurestrongeducation.com. I am in Australia. I do a lot of work on Zoom and I travel quite a lot, so I'm often in America. So I never know. I might just pop up somewhere when you where you don't expect me. But I'm really happy and open to talk to people about their environments and what's going on for their children, and how I can help more and support, so that we have these great children who grow up to be productive, happy, healthy adults that have had a really great childhood. So if you contact me at Future Strong Education, go to the contact bit and send me a message and we can be in touch.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You're most welcome. It's been a lovely conversation. Thanks for having me.
Of course.